We're discussing quarterback dynasty rankings here to close out the fantasy season. We alluded to it last week, and we're going to get into some of Jordan McNamara's rankings here. I am Chad Parsons, and welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, we talked about some of the moving pieces here, and we're getting to championship week. That's largely setting lineups for a few teams in dynasty leagues. Last chance for waivers. But we're already in off-season mode, and we're looking towards 2021 and all the moving pieces there. We discussed a few of the quarterbacks a week ago in passing with other topics on the mind. But Jordan, your rankings, which get updated regularly over at Football Guys throughout this year, and one of the notable ones and one of the trends is valuing profiles, looking back at what they've done. And the name that stood out, and I never would have guessed this because we have an ongoing mom and dad fight about certain players, and mostly you needling me more than anything. But sometimes I goad you into it and you just can't help yourself. I fully understand that. You're actually the highest on Carson Wentz. And so what I find interesting, though, we have these discussions about players and how they evolve over time. And one of those evolutions is typically you can be out on a player when they're high, and that could be high in a rookie draft, high in a startup draft setting. But I know that you are not afraid to go mix it around in the discount bin when certain profiles get super cheap. And Carson Wentz, again, you can disparage him. And I think a lot of your disparaging specifically had to do with probably being overrated, overhyped, or maybe projecting ahead too much for what he could be in terms of ceiling or stability or any part of that. But I also know you like established profiles when they drop through the floor. And I have a feeling that's the sense, but he's still higher than I would have guessed for you, which is in the mid-teens.
Yeah, so I'm due for a rankings update, which he will go down. He will go down. I will say this. There's only so far that he can go. And a couple of things I think that are important is I think his contract is going to, for a couple of reasons, it's going to necessitate he's going to be a starter. If you trade for him, I don't think it's going to be that arduous. And I heard someone talking about this, and I can't remember if it was Trent Dilfer or if it was or who it was. It was one of the big quarterback whisperers that does the media rounds, and he basically said that this is the type of quarterback that everyone is going to take a shot on because they're going to be they want to be the coach that fixes him, right? Because he has a lot of these tools. He has a lot of, he has a lot of ability. So I think this is a situation where much more so than Jameis actually in the offseason, I think Wentz is probably almost certain to be a 2021 starter. Where Jameis, that wasn't really the case. Philadelphia's going to have to figure out something to do with them, do with him. I'll say this. He has a high level season. I was going to say elite. It wasn't elite. A high level season. And I think he's been, he's proven that he can play in a certain spectrum. I think probably the high ranking season was probably high variance. I think this is probably low variance, right? I think he's probably somewhere in the middle of those. And so I think that has value, right? I'll say he's going to move down when I'm due for rankings. I think next week, we do him on like a 2 or 3 week rotation. So I'm due next week, and I didn't really know the last time when I ranked him if Hurts was going to be starting. So I'm due for that re-rank. So that's that caveat. When I look at it, I think like Carr, like I don't know how great Carr feels right now because like he's hurt and there's a possibility that Mariota could start. So, and Mariota look really good. Again, I don't think he's going to outright lose his job, but that doesn't feel like the greatest situation. Mayfield's been on a hot streak, but one of the things I think we do wrong in Dynasty consistently is overrate recent performance, especially in small sample size, especially at positions that are
tough, like quarterback.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, like with quarterback's like dating to me. Like you should only be interested in a select few people, right? There's only a certain quality that you really should get into long term, right? You should know a certain type. And you don't get, you want to date them for a while, right? You want to meet their family. You want to do the holidays. You want to go on a trip. You want to, I don't know, move in with them, whatever, right? Whatever your sequence of events is. You don't get married after 2 dates, right? And that's, I think, a lot of like Jalen Hurts is a great example of this, right? Everyone wants to wed him right now. And I mean, how many times do we have to make this mistake? I'm not saying that he's not going to be great, right? I mean, I think any base rate analysis, right? If you look at the hit rates for these round 2 guys, it'd be 22%, right? 22% of them hit for a top 12 seasonal finish, right? So, and on average, the guys that don't hit start 20 games, right? So he would be basically on track for them next year. You know, he's basically, that's his window, right? So, you know, so when you look at this, we get over our skis and in love with these guys, and we do this at receiver too, which I think is a chronic mistake that the market makes, and you know, go away from old reliable. So I'll say, even if you want to dock Carson Wentz, which I think is I don't know, I'd probably put Tua over him now, just because I think Tua's got less scar tissue. But I think Mayfield is interesting. You know, Brady has less longevity. Roethlisberger has less longevity. Jones has less longevity, at least from my take right now. Breeze certainly. Wentz, I could move him down a couple spots, but I don't think I can go much more, honestly. Maybe I have to bring Jalen Hurts up, right? Maybe that's the answer. But I have 16 right now, and I just think in terms of, you know, looking at these guys, I'm going to have a hard time being less than like 20.
Right. I was going to say drifting into the 20s feels like, I mean, you're going into suboptimal profiles that, I mean, you want to say Wentz is risky. I mean, but like you said, I mean, that there are going to be multiple, if not handfuls of NFL teams that are willing to go down the reclamation road with Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
That venturing into the unknown of a day 2 quarterback, or like you said, I mean, guys that, I mean, Ben Roethlisberger, is he going to be playing next year? And I know maybe it's not been publicly, but privately with us, I mean, you've certainly mentioned, you know, Drew Brees. There's a lot of pause there on will he be back, and you know these shorter windows where you say even reclamation projects like a Wentz. I mean, there is the upside for more, and the upside is not really for more with some of those others.
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, I guess the flip side of that, and I have been like, it's worth noting, again, this is a classic example of my dynasty philosophy. I'll be on any player at the right price. And so, like, you and I have had I don't know, what's it been, 3 years now of an ongoing is Carson Wentz good debate. And it's kind of taken on a life of its own. That was when he was at, you know, quarterback 6, right? That was when he was going ahead of Aaron Rodgers. Like, I'm like, that is just, you know, outright outrageous.
Well, you were like, well, and one thing I just thought of is, you know, at points and maybe for extended times, he was basically ranked, or market value was right around what his peak season was, right? Yeah. So you're not getting, there's not a lot of past performance equity there. And that's always something we're really sensitive of, especially when you get the hot young quarterback. Is that going to be Jalen Hurts in January? Is that going to be, I mean, every year there's 2 or 3 guys that they're going high enough, especially, and again, the stakes are low in one quarterback. So I will exclude that from the conversation. But in Superflex, high leverage, because that means you're spending first round, second round, I mean, a meaningful pick on a player that did it for a cross section or most of, or one season, and projecting that forward is very risky when you compare it to the price. It's not like you're paying a 7th round pick for that profile. And so that's why I think Jalen Hurts is going to be pretty darn interesting in how the market globally says, here's what I'm willing to invest in new team builds, because that's always the one where you say you're combining win now teams and teams that are, you know, looking for the aggregate, and generally young hot players finishing the season are in demand, and there's going to be a quasi fight on how early will they go, and can I be the smartest guy in the room and drafting him the earliest, because that means I'm the smartest.
Yeah, and I think the counter to that is, if you're gonna see acquiring or trading for Carson Wentz is kind of tough, right? Unless you sort of make it part of a bigger deal, because then you're basically offering someone the you know, hey, here's the admission, you have to take a huge sunk cost, right? Like, especially if it's a recent startup and they took them early, like, hey, here's a huge discount on your guy. Like, you got to eat it, right? I mean, when you do that in sort of a 1-for-1 trade situation, that's suboptimal. I think the it's I think less likely to get done from just a psychological point of view. But when I think
downgrade, right? You take the downgrade, like you go, oh well, I'll take the hit, or I will downgrade at quarterback, but then I will upgrade somewhere else. Like that type of 2 for 2, 3 for 2, those types of things are the way that you kind of package it together. Yeah.
You got to bury him in a bigger trade. So I think I'm going to do some of that. I will say I think the smash play is him at like. And again, my rankings have him. So let's just say I have him at 20, just to use a round number. I think that's probably going to be high in terms of the rankings. Like I look down here.
25 to 30 is maybe where he settles.
Yeah. And so
stink factor.
Yeah, right. And even when you look here, like there's other folks that have him, 20, 24, 24, 20, right? So there are some other folks that are higher, right? And I think Mayfield's going to have to go above him. Tua, like I said, less scar tissue there, but I do think there's, that's about the line. And then, and so then that's just vets, right? Like that's assuming Jameis doesn't have a job. That's assuming that Marcus Mariota doesn't have a job. That's assuming that Andy Dalton doesn't have a job. Not that Dalton will go ahead of Wentz, but that idea, right? That there's no, that Taysom Hill isn't named the starter, right? Like all of those things. And the fact that I know that you've talked in other forums about, there might be 4, 5, 6 first round quarterbacks, right? There might be 4 top 10 guys, right? And where they go, right? And so that's not even, we'll just take 2, right? You take Fields and Lawrence, which that's going to be a fascinating debate in and of itself, but you take them and they're going to go above him. So already you're pushing Wentz to, and again, when you get in a full rookie draft season, right? These especially in startups, right? No one wants to take the quote falling asset. He's already screaming at like late 20s. And again, you at that price, you have to be on him, which is a stark difference from where I was banging on him, which was, as a top 8 guy. Again, this is the same, right? It's the exact opposite of what we did with Josh Allen, right? We spent 6 months banging on Josh Allen because we didn't think that he could complete a pass coming out of college. He goes top 10 in the NFL draft. We're like, wow, that's surprising. And then he falls through the floor in rookie drafts because he went to Buffalo, and people had this notion about Buffalo's offense. And, we don't know those things, right? We're terrible at that, historically terrible at predicting the future of quality of offenses. And all of a sudden now he's a pseudo MVP candidate, right? And we were off him when he was going to be, the number 1 pick in the draft, on him when he was a mid-second round rookie pick. And then you see now, right? Now you have to readjust. Do you feel comfortable with this? I like the player, but he's the exact opposite of Carson Wentz, right? You're basically at the highest that he's ever been. And we didn't really think that this was in his range of outcomes. At least I didn't. So, and I'm a pretty wide range of outcomes kind of guy. So, so it's an interesting when you parallel those guys, they're sort of reverse track of one another. I think it's an interesting comparison.
Yeah. And I was going to say about Jalen Hurts, we mentioned him in passing, that he's one of the more interesting watches, to close the season, the dynasty season, if you will, and just sort of evaluating and squirreling away notes and observations for the offseason. I do think the biggest takeaway, and we've said before, whether, if a guy's ranking or where he goes in drafts or what his general market valuation is X, as long as you have him. Again, it's not like X plus 1 or X minus 1. If you have them, if there's actual variance there of your dissenting opinion, then and valuation, it doesn't really matter how much. So I'm pretty confident that I will be not in on Jalen Hurts. I will say that he had this, I can run a bunch and big upside, and that is basically the X factor for fantasy production. This is independent of how long can you hold a job. Is an NFL team going to view you as a long-term franchise cementing starter and other things? Do you ever develop as a passer? I would argue Cam Newton has been one that has had a job for a long time, and yet there's still been plenty of strides that need to be made as a passer. But you see how long that has lasted. Now, obviously, he was 1-1 in the draft. So that helps you in many ways and probably speaks to other parts of his profile beyond, just the static stuff that we know. And Hurts is not coming from that. He's coming from the second round. So that automatically insulates you tremendously less, as you mentioned. I mean, the hit rate is lower. That fifth-year option, the odds of another contract, the odds of holding that starting job, pretty much everything moves down. But with Hurts, it's going to be interesting because I think fantasy-wise, and you're seeing that, I think he was did he finish at QB1? I'm pretty sure. It wasn't Ryan Finley coming out Monday night. I remember I glanced at things on Sunday, and Monday didn't impact that too much for the weekly finishes. But the point is, Hurts is on this track that he feels like such a, Wentz, thank goodness he's gone. Thank goodness he's not starting. Breath of fresh air, pivot, and alternative in Philadelphia. And the fact that he's more mobile than Carson Wentz, the fact that he's moving around, the fact that he's an unknown, we've seen this before where NFL defenses and opposing coaching staffs planning against you just have less of a sample. They don't have a whole season. They don't have a career built up of this is how we will or can defend X player. And what they want to do, what they don't want to do. So you have that market correction going into year two, and a lot of times you see a step back with quarterbacks in that regard. And the other part would be, again, just the rushing part is going to be a huge fantasy factor, but it's one that, are you going to play long enough to keep that benefit of the rushing when that's where we're moving with a position, but yet, again, it's 3 games in, so I want to, condemn the guy. But when you see him drop back and throw an actual pass from the actual pocket, there's a lot that leaves to be desired there. Again, it's really early, but he was he played a lot in college. This isn't like a 21-year-old with one starting season in college. So I want to put that prism, but you don't have to be, as we saw with Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, and others, you don't have to be one of the better passers in the NFL to be one of the strong fantasy producers at the position. So it's a really interesting scenario with Jalen Hurts.
I'd be careful about that statement because Josh Allen is one of the better passers in the NFL right now. So
was he quote unquote? I know.
I got it. I'm just teasing you. Yeah. It's an absolutely remarkable turnaround. I agree with that. One thing I would say is like as a prep for the offseason type of valuation device. So the hit rate on guys drafted in the second round is about 22%. Like I said earlier, it's about 22% for guys to hit for a single top 12 finish at the quarterback position. And that if they miss the first year, it drops to 18%. When you go and actually break it down for guys in the first round, especially top 10 guys. So top guys drafted outside the top 10 perform really close to second round quarterbacks. It's actually like you could almost look at guys drafted from like 11 through the end of the second round as essentially the same in terms of that, which I think is pretty surprising. And but when you look at guys in the top 10, 64%. Right. So they're about 3 times more likely to hit than the guys in the second round. So when you think about Hurts, and Hurts is, his comps would be down at 18%. Now, is he higher than that now? Well, if he enters next season with a starting job, yes, but so is Drew Lock, right? I mean, you see these things and there's not a lot of, right, they don't get a lot of runway. And I think something that you said is important. And I think we have to balance this, right? We know a lot about Jalen Hurts, right? And it's interesting because we knew a lot about Justin Herbert too, and a lot of that was wrong. We didn't know
him going high in the draft, which he did.
Yeah, and it was weird. It was interesting, right? Because a lot of people, we had a huge sample on him from college. He stayed an extra, he stayed past when he could have came out. And
which
people
doesn't help guys.
Right, it doesn't help guys. It probably didn't help him. And then he goes top 10, people were sort of, not in the Josh Allen sense, but there was a lot of, film folks that weren't super enthusiastic about that selection. And he does have a big sample size. And, now you see film folks who talk a lot about, hey, this is the stuff that they're running that's different. And they're like, he never showed this at Oregon because they didn't let him do it. So that's an interesting thing, right? When you think about it, and with Hurts, you sort of are balancing that, right? We know a lot about Hurts, right? And there's some reason to think that was, that's capped. I mean, you and I had did did a show maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I think the first time we ever talked was we actually watched an Oregon game, and it was Herbert, and it was like he was a freshman. And I was like, my God, the ball jumps off his hand. And here we are, you know what I mean? And, it was, we had no idea at that point, but it was just one of those things that stuck, right? Jalen Hurts has never really been that. So we know he's a runner. We sort of have this question about what, long-term his development as a passer is. And I would just say, keep it on a spectrum, right? So when you're pushing him in the top 15s, right, and if you're going to do that, you have to know that that's going to be up ahead of guys who are probably going to go in the top 10 of the NFL draft. And that's historically a horrible bet. Right? It's a horrible bet to take Jalen Hurts over a guy like that right now. So that would just be my caution when you do these things. I'm not saying you got to bail, right? But I'm probably not buying high on him right now, and just keep his range of outcomes in a reasonable, in a reasonable place.
Yeah, and I think the whiplash effect is another thing, that kind of applies here. And we talk about it before, probably in passing a couple times, which is if you quote unquote miss, on this doesn't mean globally, maybe you drafted him once, whether it was a startup draft or rookie draft season, that you weren't in on a player as a target player. You weren't in that they were in the mix for you. And, if I'm in this range, there's a couple players that I like, and sometimes it'll be this guy, player X. So if you weren't in on Jalen Hurts as a rookie, where he was obviously more affordable than he is today and will be in January, that I will say it's hard to kind of be in, because you had barriers on why you did not like them enough to draft them more than you did as a clear target player initially. And that's why we always center on rookie drafts and startup drafts, because for your team, whether it's annually with the rookie draft or the one-time startup with a new league, that's your chance, right? That's the chance for you to push in your chips and say, this is how I feel about my whole roster that I'm going to acquire at said prices of the marketplace of this league. And so if you're not in on Hurts, and let's, again, you can superimpose this to any player in any particular year. Rookies are the easiest. If you're not in, then when the price spikes up, you're not going to be in either, probably, because there's enough of a barrier of, here's the profile I didn't like, whether that's draft position, whether that's some part of their profile concern, some translation to the NFL type factor. And if you weren't in, now the adjustment comes. That's sort of like saying, hey, you like this TV? You're like, yeah, that's all right. All right, it's $300. And you go, I don't know. And then something comes out, it's like, this is the best TV ever. And you didn't buy it at $300. And then, 6 months from now, it's like, Consumer Reports comes out, not a plug. And you say, and it's like, this is now the TV of 2020. It's the best TV out there. And supply goes down. It reminds me of the Christmas toys. I don't know if it still exists now. You would know, Jordan. Is there still a hot Christmas toy?
I don't know.
Everyone 80s, 90s, 15, 20 years ago and beyond. There was always this is it. It's hard to get it. There's a secondary market to try to, people try to buy out, online resources probably, but it feels like that. So the $300 TV to finish that you got the $300 TV, but now it's considered the best TV ever. And it goes up to $500. Well, if you didn't like it at $300, it doesn't change the TV. It changes sort of what's happening around the sizzle, the buzz around the TV. And so this is if so-and-so's a late second round rookie pick, and you're like, I don't know, I like this other guy. So then you draft him. And then this other guy ends up being hot. And now you're like, well, now he costs a first. You're like, I'm out. I mean, he's the same guy, that things are a little different now, but not enough. I mean, I was below market. And yeah, I think there's reasons to be more optimistic now for sure. But I still haven't gotten to market or above, which is kind of what you need to be with your precious ammunition and precious assets for your dynasty roster. I mean, it's a finite number that you can have. And so I still think, I don't know if you feel the same way, Jordan, but you lag behind sort of the sizzle and pulse that raises a player way up like this.
Oh yeah, and I was thinking about this last night, and just walk through what the first year of the rookie drafts were last year, and just think about the career arcs of these guys. Right, Burrow starts while he's on IR, probably a buy opportunity. Tua is benched behind Fitzpatrick, plays, gets benched again, and is now back playing. There's probably a buy opportunity in there. Justin Herbert started the season behind Tyrod Taylor, and because of that, there was a buy window at the start of in rookie drafts. And then, the medical incident, and we're just thankful Dr. Gene didn't, we have a doctor we feel safe with getting injections if we need him. Edwards-Helaire right after the Bell signing, Jonathan Taylor when Jordan Wilkins was out snapping him, DeAndre Swift right around the time that he had 6 snaps in a week, J.K. Dobbins when he was buried third on the depth chart, Cam Akers when he was buried third on the depth chart. Jerry Jeudy's been okay, but I think a disappointment. Jalen Reagor was hurt and went through all the Wentz problems. Justin Jefferson was sitting behind Olabisi Johnson to start the season. And like the only person apparently that has not had a ding in their valuation this year has been the wide receiver 3 for the Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb. So 11 out of 12 of the guys actually had a dip in production. The maybe one of the more warranted ones in terms of sample size that we can be concerned about is actually Lamb. I digress. These things don't just go straight on a runway.
It's like a freight train and just goes straight up the hill in like a perfect fashion and immediately so that you can start them. You're telling me that there's twists in the road of an NFL rookie player and just all NFL players? That's fascinating.
It's hard to imagine sometimes when you read some things. But I would just say with a guy like Jalen Hurts, right? There's going to be growing pains. Like a lot of teams passed on him, right? Twice. And so when you think about that, just keep that in mind. And that's a lot of stuff about the hit rates. I'm not, if you were to say, hey, Jordan, the base rate on a guy like this in the second year who hasn't hit is 18%. You feel good or bad about, I'd probably put it over, right? But again, maybe I put it a good bit over, but again, it shouldn't be 85%, right? It shouldn't be, this guy's a guarantee. And I think that's the thing we need to have a context on. Even the worst top 10 quarterback is going to have a better, odds of being a fantasy starter than Jalen Hurts is. And when especially a sustained long-term starter. And I think that's sort of the balance that you have to have with a player like him.
Yeah. And just to go back to, his profile is a strong one in terms of, he has a lot of traits that point to a round 1 guy or a guy that was certainly drafted higher than he was. But I think what you said, which is, well, he wasn't, and that's a key point. We've said that in passing with each other for a couple of years now with Joe Mixon, right? It was like, oh, he's a first round talent. Oh, if it wasn't for this, and this by the NFL, he would have gone in the first round. ... But he didn't. Right. The point is he didn't. Like at some point, that is a fixture part of, an inchangeable part to their profile from that point forward. They didn't, and that's why the NFL draft is a glorious TV show. Why? We're finally 4 months getting put into action of, everything you've heard and rumors and projections and possibilities. Nope, this is it. Boom. Answers to the test. You finally have them. And for Hurts, he has a lot of the mobility he has, the fact that he's not 21 years old, but really close. So young on the scale, and he checks all the passing boxes. But I just, the first part of that draft process for me was being in Mobile at the Senior Bowl and Jalen Hurts. I was like, this guy can't throw. He can't throw. He holds the ball. No, I'm summarizing my notes here 11 months later. But seriously, he could not throw. He held the ball. And I've seen that early on in the NFL, that if he has to sit there and look and wait, and you know what, little precursor here, I see a little bit of that in Justin Fields, they just sit there and hold it. And it's like, they have that just a brain freeze too many times that other quarterbacks, the ones that are processing quickly, seeing it and getting the ball out. You can criticize that sometimes, someone like Alex Smith, they get to their check down too quickly, right? But they're getting it out. They're getting it to a playmaker. They're not taking a bunch of sacks. That's actually valued by NFL teams, of staying on script, right? Managing the game, the negative, dirty word and phrase, right? But for Hurts, so he's making play. He's running around, and frankly, you expect rookie quarterbacks to do that. They're transitioning, and what can get him out of the fire? It can, get him out of the pocket. But But we've seen Lamar Jackson, right? Extreme rushing example. Get hemmed in a little bit this year, right? I mean, teams are kind of gearing for that. Is he going to be able to overcome big picture passing? We'll see. Kyler Murray, are they going to hem him in? Is next year going to be the learning year of defenses having a better plan? Every once in a while, is a player resistant to this sort of transition and learning curve or transition to something different, a different iteration of how they play? Not saying you don't run for 3, 4, 5, 600 yards, but the magic, how many rushing touchdowns does Kyler Murray have? So Hurts is doing it right now. But again, going back to the Senior Bowl, he held the ball, inaccurate. I mean, you can look here. 65% passer in college. He's great. No problems there. Well, that's why you have to blend numbers with watching them. I mean, and then getting them in a new environment, right? I mean, that's one concern I have about Mac Jones. I did my first, watch 2-3 games watching Mac Jones for Alabama. And I mean, I think it's easy, relatively speaking, at Alabama. You say, look at all the inherent built-in advantages you have as the quarterback for Alabama. I mean, you're working from a competitive advantage, especially with their litany of wide receivers in recent years. The fact that there's so many just giant pasture, you can have cattle sometimes in the spaces that these quarterbacks are throwing to, open windows that just don't exist. You may have 3 to 4 throws a game. This is anecdotal. 3 to 4 throws a game in the NFL that are as open as many throws you have in college. So, and that's why I see these early projections, and I agree with them that Mac Jones is not a first-round quarterback. Mac Jones may be a late second-round quarterback, a third-round quarterback. And this is someone that's in the running for the Heisman. They could win the national championship, putting up big numbers. But you have to look at the traits. And with Jalen Hurts, it was the same sort of thing. And so until I'm maybe a little bit resistant one, but if I see clear question marks as a passer, because Greg Cosell, I mean, listening long ago where it wasn't as convenient to get podcasts. You actually had to download it to your computer and then upload it to your device, all these archaic things where, these fancy phones, you didn't have that. And so when Greg Cosell said, eventually you have to win from the pocket, and he's never deviated from this. Yes, he's been covering the NFL and scouting.
Because it's true, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the NFL game changing a little bit. Do we have more mobile quarterbacks than ever before? Yes. Unequivocally, yes. Are some NFL offenses changing their stripes in how you construct an NFL offense to benefit from mobility? All these things are true. But what he said, it still is a pillar for me, which is, and I use it for Dynasty, eventually you have to win from the pocket. It's why I don't own any Lamar Jackson. I may not, but you know what? If the market self-corrects, I may be back in.
How's quarterback 2 feel for you? How's quarterback 2 feel for you?
Exactly.
Right?
So it's all within the prism of cost. But again, I'm not going to be actually in, if the cost is meaningful for rookies or for, startup draft cost, because eventually you have to win from the pocket. And you know what? I think NFL teams think that way too. And it's going to eventually wear thin. He's a runner that masquerades as a passer. And if you can't hang, you can't eventually win and rise above situation and pass rush and sit there in the pocket, maybe do a little wiggle, and now you throw the ball from the pocket. You're going to live or die in the NFL, and I think eventually wither and die in terms of your opportunities because you can't do that. So I know that's a very macro thing I'm talking about, but just have pause. Again, we're not talking flyers. You could say Hurts was quasi flyer in rookie draft time. We're way beyond that. That was Sunday on the calendar. We're to Friday. It cost a lot more. We're getting to the weekend, and it's way more expensive.
Yeah. That was at freshman orientation. Now we're at now we're at senior year. That was a long time ago. I'll say the difference between guys that can win from the pocket and guys that can't is the difference between the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots this year, right?
I mean, that's a good example. They're rolling back time in New England, are they not?
Cam Newton can't win from the pocket, and in fairness, he doesn't have the weapons. But Josh Allen can, and I'll be the first to say, evaluating quarterbacks is incredibly complicated. especially, I'm not someone that played it at a lot of the level that, Trent Dilfer and some of these other guys have. To a man, when you listen to them, the guys that do this, right? The Trent Dilfers and the Romo and these guys, they all are stunned by the development of Josh Allen. And this isn't something that I think I saw coming. I said I think he can be better than last year. He was sort of on a, when you look at completion percentage over expectation and some of those stats, right? You could see, hey, he's progressing. But like really took quarantine to be fundamental time and is I think a weapon as a passer now as compared to a liability last year. That's rare, right? That's not something that's super common, right? And so I think that, again, if you're projecting Jalen Hurts, you're projecting Lamar Jackson, that's not something that I would use as a prior in terms of saying, hey, listen, Josh Allen can do it. That's not really, and with Jalen Hurts too. I mean, Josh Allen, right? I think the funny thing with Jalen Hurts is, can he develop into that? I mean, maybe, but we knew a lot less about Josh Allen, right? Because he was kind of a raw prospect, right? Because he didn't have a huge resume, right? We know a lot about Jalen Hurts, and it just doesn't seem like that. I'll say with this, Josh Allen, and I recognize my own bias, so this is where I'm coming from, and I think you understand this about me. I have a really, really hard time with ranking him right now. And because as I sit here, we're in the midst of a little bit of a down tick in Russell Wilson, who doesn't look quite as good as he was. And, we have questions about Deshaun Watson. Statistically, I think by almost most measures, he's better than Kyler Murray. I mean, we'll see. Kyler Murray projects to have the pedigree of the better passer, but isn't right now. So I think that's a really interesting debate between those two.
Well, and the price difference too is, a decent amount clip between Murray and Allen. So that helps, if you got to be really in on Murray to, go with that arbitrage.
Yeah. And so, but when you sort of boil it all down, I could make a case for Josh Allen at quarterback too. Again, I don't feel, I understand that I have a bias there, so I'll probably never do that. And maybe it's overcorrecting, but when you sort of look at level of passer, right? 40 touchdown season, don't grow on trees. And the other stuff backs it up too, right? This isn't fluky in terms of, some of the stat stuff. Maybe he regresses. Maybe this isn't, maybe perfect Josh Allen isn't what we're going to get. It's probably not what we're going to get. But in terms of career arcs, I mean, if you, and this is a classic example too, right? Like you can't take just Joe Burrow over him. You just can't do that. You can't take Tua over him, right? You can't take, if you take Trevor Lawrence over Josh Allen, I think I think it's a mistake, right? And I think that people will want to do those things. So much more about Josh Allen, there's questions about some of these other guys. Like, we don't know about Joe Burrow yet, right? We think we have a good idea. We don't know which Trevor is transition is going to be to the NFL, right? We really know what Josh Allen's transition to the NFL looks like. Is it maybe quite this high of a ceiling? Maybe not. But I think when you sort of look at those, right, I don't think you can take any of those other guys who haven't proven it yet over Josh Allen. And when you sort of stack him up in terms of profiles, like, you can make the case at quarterback too. I would probably go Wilson. I'd probably go a couple of those other guys, but I absolutely see that. And I don't think that's a conversation a lot of folks are having. I mean, listen, if I was going to go Kyler Murray or Josh Allen, if you told me I had to pick one of them and I had to pick them at quarterback too, I'm taking Josh Allen ahead of Kyler Murray. And I just think when you take Kyler Murray that high, you're missing out on an equal, if not better prospect around or, more later and startup drafts. I think it's a mistake.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can have a cutoff point, kind of looking at some stuff here for quarterbacks. I mean, you can have a cutoff point and say, well, this is where it gets dicier, or this is where I would kind of stop, where in Superflex, I wouldn't really want my QB1 lower than this or whatever. But I will say that typically, and we might be in an era of this where it's Patrick Mahomes, and then let's put a line or two, and then let's say we got everybody else. And so that everybody else, and we've talked about, within tiers, whether it's your valuation system or if you're actively drafting, because that's when, exploiting tiers and lines that you're going to draw on your list, whether you wrote them out on a napkin, you type them up all pretty, you print them out from somebody. But the QB2 is going to be a classic case of that this year. And it typically, I think we might be in a zone of a few years like that, where so you stepping up, especially in a super flex startup draft, Mahomes goes at 1 or 2 or whatever. Now that next quarterback that goes off the board, it's probably knee deep in suboptimal, right? I mean, you're just sitting there and it's just dripping, it's like a big sandwich, you got all the dressing, and, if it's not wrapped up in the wrapper, it goes everywhere. And that's kind of what it is. It's like you are guaranteed to rub this all over your shirt is how it goes. QB2, and even 3 or 4. I mean, because if you want to put, because you've mentioned a lot of names, so if you're putting together, Murray and Jackson and Watson and Wilson and Allen, and if you want, Dak, I mean, already that's what, 5-6 guys. And basically, I think both of us would agree that. So what's the difference between 2 and 6, or what? Like, who's the last guy going there? And you kind of know 1 or 2 guys it won't be, but it's like from the rest of them, right, who's the last guy? Or can I make sure I'm in that zone where it's a round later, 10 picks, 14, 16 picks, whatever it ends up being in a super flex, your tolerance level to get on the back end of that thing. And you're like, well, that's the value. What did I get for moving down? Or what did I get? What player did I get before? And now that's who I'm getting, as the quarterback pivot there within that grouping, because you're getting equity. You're getting a discount of a tier. Now, maybe you have 3 tiers within those 5 or 6 guys. So that's going to be very personal and individualized. But for me, I think those names are pretty close, and the definite don't make this pick. I mean, you said, foot to the fire, I have to make a pick, Murray or Allen at QB2. That's a lot of parameters that, again, you get in a draft. You don't actually have to do that. But right. It is.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
It is worthy of a conversation. And right. That's always the thing, well, so what price do you have to pay? That's sort of stepping up and saying in a dynasty trade, I'll give you whatever you want. And it's like, well, yeah, you'll get them. You'll probably get them unless you're a really horrible team with nothing to offer. But that's why you don't run into negotiations like that. What will you pay? I'll take it. So whatever you want.
Yeah.
Just accept me. But anyway, but QB4, way more tolerant. QB6, even better. But stepping up and saying, who's the guy at the top of this tier? That's dangerous. And it's almost like setting lineups, right? I mean, you will have a very difficult time of getting it spot on correct. And at QB2, you basically have to.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking at some ADP and some other things. Like there's 7-8 guys going in the first round of startup drafts. Like, and I like Justin Herbert, but quarterback 5 in the middle of the first round. Like again, I mean, there's ahead of Russell Wilson. Like in terms of you can't miss in those picks. Again, I like Herbert a lot, but that's an interesting one there. I'll say, like, let me ask you this, just in terms of if you're doing a startup draft, tomorrow, how much do you need one of those? What line are you comfortable at having as quarterback 1? Like, how many guys would you feel comfortable with going as your quarterback 1 in a dynasty startup?
If I'm shooting high, you mean if I'm shooting high or if I'm playing the discount game? Because those are 2 different answers, and I can play it either way.
Both.
Because I do think it's pretty. I think it's pretty robust at some other positions. So it depends on that. Obviously, if it's 2 tight end, you gotta step up at tight end a lot earlier, and I would prioritize that over quarterback, just in terms of what dries up faster in my comfort level. But to me, it's in that Dak Prescott, Aaron Rodgers zone, like fully comfortable of like this is my guy, and I think there's high upside. I think there's minimal downside. And so that's sort of my zone. So we're out to 9, 10, 11, sort of maybe in that zone, depending on how things shake out. But so sort of that zone. Now, if I'm going, if I'm going my typical, which is, you wait a while and like, let me get some profiles I like, but you don't even really start looking at the position until around 5 or 6. So that's a different answer, because obviously those guys are long gone. I do think Aaron Rodgers is interesting because he was like the go-to super flex, where it's like he's going where After they draft Jordan Love, or, there was just like, oh, he had a down year last year. And then you get to 2020 off season and it's like Aaron Rodgers was falling through the floor. And I mean, didn't you say like he's one of the rare cases at his age, like it's almost unheard of for someone to rise in terms of startup from year to year, a mid-30s or later quarterback without something graphic like they retired and they were 22nd round and now they're back. Like something crazy like that needs to occur for
Andrew Luck coming back at 35.
Yeah, like Andrew Luck came back. I will say I stashed him in a few deeper superflex. You never know. It's for the cost of a running back 4 on some NFL depth chart. That's maybe a free agent. I'll take that. I mean, I'm in for that. But it's like a 0.2% chance he's back. My personal opinion, but still worth it.
Fat tails.
Yeah, exactly. Fat tails. That fish is all tail. Catch that thing. But yeah, I think when where was I going with that? Got off on fat tails.
Right. No, comfort level at the position. Comfort level where your quarterback one line is.
Aaron Rodgers is one of the few risers. Like that's basically unheard of, and I think he's projected to probably be higher in January than he was back in the swooning summer months when Jordan Love is going to push him out of town quickly.
Yeah, you comfortable with Burrow?
Some of the points you made. I mean, that's not my flavor. I mean, I wouldn't. I think that's a risk. Do I like Joe Burrow? Sure. I mean, did he actually? I mean, this year on a per game basis, he actually outproduced what a typical 101 does. And so, is he on the positive track? But you know what? People viewed him way above that anyway. So, is that above expectation? Not really. Is it above historical mean? Yes. But again, I don't think there's any need, right? I mean, you sit there and it's like, well, if he goes ahead of or similar to Josh Allen or Dak Prescott, or or you're saying who can I get later? I mean, does Trevor Lawrence go ahead of him in drafts?
So.
I mean, so but now what's the difference? Because I like Lawrence more. So you say, I mean, it costs me a little bit more to get Lawrence. All right, I'm in for that. If it's a big difference, okay, now I'm probably out on both. So it's always that like if this, then that sort of, book approach to it. But, but yeah, I think general, I mean, you get Burrow in the top 6, 7, 8, 9 quarterbacks. Like that's a little rich for me. So
what about Herbert?
See, I'm in terms of putting together the profile and doing more. And I still think with Herbert, like he's so resistant to running. It's pretty fascinating when you look at his profile and it's like big guy, mobile, like there's big potential for rushing there. And yet he just doesn't do it, which what I would say is from a lasting effect in the NFL is great news. That is like, no, I went from the pocket. No, that's my thing. Like I can run. Like you see him get out of the pocket. He's like an antelope. He gets out there. It's like, oh, there's 14 yards. Like, he can do it with it like anybody else that's running well at the position. Yet he just does not do it. And so it's a fantasy frustration to some degree where you're like, there's a lot of points left on the table here if he just exited the pocket now and then. But the other part is you say, this is really good affirmation long term that he's already doing that. There's no transition that needs to take place from, you run a lot, but eventually you got to win from the pocket. He's willing to do that now. So I think that's great news, but you're also like, 2, 3, 4 points a game would be nice in that capacity.
Yeah.
But like Herbert's on a very good track. Again, the problem is, where's he going though? He's going high enough where you're like, you don't have to do it. See, that's the thing, right? You said, how can you sit there and take Herbert over Josh Allen? And that's a very good point. That's a very good point. How can you take him over Russell Wilson? How can you take him even approaching Deshaun Watson's price? All great points.
Right.
All great points. I'm sitting in the pew going, you know what? That's I've been here for every service. Yep, that's
preach.
Exactly. That's the choir going, yep. This is number 52. Number 52 in this book. I've heard it before. All right. Any final thoughts as we go into championship week, Jordan?
I'll just say, like the early Dynasty career, quarterback was just such an afterthought, and now we're playing more super flex and more 2 QB, and like if you're not playing this, like again, this is a conversation that you and I have begun to have much more in the past 2 years, really, than we did ever before in terms of caring about this type of stuff, right? Because quarterback matters now, and it absolutely does, and if you're not doing Superflex, you're not doing 2QB, get in, and it just opens up a whole other thing. I mean, something that you said, I think does the same thing, and maybe you don't want to play every league like this, but 2 tight ends is the same thing, right? It's opening you to different players and different strategies and looking at different things, and it translates too, right? So if you're just playing one quarterback, but you go to play a Superflex, right, you're opening up a whole nother set of skills in your toolbox. Same thing with 2 tight end, right? Like you and I playing a couple of 2 tight end leagues, and now I'm going back to the 1 tight end. It feels like I'm taking the batting weight off, right? I have all that more knowledge. I have all that more, if I need a streamer, right, I know, a lot more guys because they're all relevant in a deeper format, right? I think that's a good example. So if I'm a takeaway, maybe a tip for the off season, it's A, get, good luck in week 16, and B, try something different, because it'll sharpen your skills and it'll make you a better Dynasty player.
Yeah, that's a great point. And honestly, I think we should, starting next week, probably do like a series, whether that's 1 show, 5 shows, I mean, something in the middle, most likely, but kind of go either by position or just talk some formats, talk about ways to either make positions more relevant or things that we've seen out there in terms of formats, twists and things like that, because people are going to be looking at new leagues. People are going to be looking at new formats. You just mentioned, you might be looking at Superflex for the first time. You might be, which again, is kind of where the whole marketplace of Dynasty is going, that 2, 3, 4 years from now, I mean, it's going to be like, yeah, I'm going to start one. Yeah. It began 8 years ago. Well, that's why you're in it. I mean, they're not starting many of them. And so, right. But going through that, either by position on some of the twists in terms of lineups, valuations, scoring adaptations that we're either we've seen, or just be prepared to see this in the marketplace of new leagues starting up or orphan opportunities, all those types of things. I would call it mechanics of going into the off season as a wide-eyed, Dynasty GM, that you're already in leagues or you're starting a league, or, any of those factors that's going to lead you to new opportunities. Because, and another thing we'll mention in future weeks, of just the concept of maybe adapting or changing existing leagues about rule changes or things. Early off season is the perfect time. No, not in season to change things, but in the early off season of, hey, here's some things that, whether we have firsthand experience of something that occurred this season, but things that we might want to enact in the future, there's ways to go about that are better than others, and maybe more extreme examples that, hey, if you want this, don't try to change one of your leagues. Just, you need to be in a different league that's going to start that way from the get-go. So Jordan McNamara, myself, Chad Parsons, remind you to subscribe, rate, and review the Football Guys shows on all of your podcasting platforms. Sign up for that Football Guys daily email update. You're going to get that all the way through the Super Bowl, little hiatus, and then back in April from Joe Bryant, your daily guide to all the news and instant analysis. And I will say, the offseason is not the offseason, because you could have waivers open in the offseason, and news, whether it's contract related, injury recovery related, all these things are things you're not going to miss in that daily email update. And that can be, people forget, flat out forget for weeks or months at a time to set waivers. If you have regular waivers running, maybe it's once a month, maybe it's every week, maybe it's not until February 17th, whatever it is, you want to be on that, because there are some very liquid and robust times that you're going to want to churn out those roster spots. So the news is something you can't ignore in the off season. Even if you're like, well, the season's done, and in March or April I pick it back up, make sure you don't have waivers running, or basically there's nothing going on, and that's a valid reason then to shift your time and attention to other leagues or other things. So that's footballguys.com/free. So again, thanks so much. And in this episode, we discussed quarterback a lot, but macro approach to Dynasty, your leagues, player profiles, etc. I'm Chad Parsons. He's Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your Week 16 Dynasty leagues.